The Wild West wasn't just a place. It was a battleground where nature, outlaws, and the unforgiving environment tested every settler's will to survive. No roads, no conveniences, and a world full of uncertainty. Imagine being out there on the frontier, far from any town or safety, where every day felt like a fight for your life. That's exactly what the pioneers faced when they packed up their lives and ventured westward in search of a new beginning. In this harsh world of Wild West history, survival wasn't guaranteed. A single misstep, a lack of knowledge, or an untimely accident could mean death. But there was hope for those who were prepared. Pioneers didn't just survive, they thrived because they mastered critical survival skills that allowed them to face down the wilderness, wild animals, and even ruthless outlaws. These skills weren't optional, they were essential. As we journey through this list, consider the tenacity of these pioneers. Could you have thrived under such conditions, or would you have been one of the many who didn't make it past the first winter? These Wild West history survival techniques weren't just methods, they were a way of life. Top 1. Firemaking. The heart of survival. In the Wild West, fire wasn't just a luxury, it was a lifeline. Whether you were cooking food, keeping warm through freezing nights, or warding off predators, fire was essential to survival. Imagine the harsh winters and the vast open plains where temperatures could drop below freezing in a heartbeat. Without fire, your chances of survival would drop dramatically. Wild West history teaches us that settlers needed to be resourceful to start a fire in less than ideal conditions. Pioneers didn't have the convenience of matches or modern lighters. They had to rely on flint and steel, or sometimes a bow drill, which required skill and patience to use effectively. It wasn't just about striking a spark, it was about building and maintaining that flame long enough to keep you safe and alive. One method that was widely used was the fire starter kit, which included flint, steel, and some kind of tinder like dry grass or cotton. In extreme cases, pioneers used fire plows, tools that would be dragged across dry ground to start a blaze. An incredibly useful technique when surrounded by the right materials. But making fire wasn't just about the tools. It was also about understanding the elements, what was safe to burn and what wasn't. Dry grass, twigs, and even animal dung were often used as fuel. Wild West history shows how pioneers had to adapt to the local environment, learning to make fire from materials that could withstand the harsh climates of deserts, mountains, or plains. Imagine being stuck in the wilderness with nothing but the tools you have on hand to start a fire. How long could you last without it? For pioneers, fire was everything. Without it, you wouldn't have warmth, safety, or the ability to cook. It's easy to take fire for granted today, but in the Old West, it was the difference between life and death. Top 2. Hunting and fishing. Providing for survival. Once you've secured water, the next essential skill in Wild West history is knowing how to provide food. The harsh realities of frontier life meant that most settlers couldn't rely on stores or constant shipments of supplies. They had to rely on the land and their hunting skills to feed themselves and their families. Hunting, fishing, and trapping were integral skills that meant survival in the Old West. For pioneers who didn't have access to farming land or those living in isolated areas, hunting became their primary source of food. They hunted for game like deer, elk, and buffalo, which provided meat, hides, and bones that could be used for various purposes. The buffalo, in particular, was critical to survival on the plains, and nearly every part of the animal was used: meat for food, hides for clothing, and bones for tools. One skill that stood out in Wild West history was marksmanship. A pioneer had to be a good shot to ensure they could bring down enough game to feed the family. Whether with a rifle or a bow, hitting the target was crucial. Some settlers trained themselves from an early age to aim for vital spots on the animals, which ensured a quicker, more humane kill. The success of the hunt often determined a family's survival for the season. Fishing was another necessary skill. Many settlers, especially those near rivers, lakes, and streams, relied on fishing to supplement their food. Early pioneers learned to fish with basic rods or by spearing fish. Techniques such as netting or trapping fish in shallow areas were also common. In many towns, fishing wasn't just about feeding the family. It became a way to trade goods or even make a bit of money. Trapping was another essential part of survival, especially for those who lived in more remote areas. Traps were set for animals like rabbits, foxes, squirrels, and beavers, whose fur was highly valuable in Wild West history. A well-set trap could catch animals that were crucial for food or trade. Some settlers even built small snares or deadfalls in their spare time to ensure a steady food supply. Overall, Wild West history shows that hunting, fishing, and trapping weren't just hobbies. They were the difference between life and death. Having a reliable method of acquiring food kept families alive, and those who mastered these skills were often seen as the most resourceful pioneers. Top 4. Navigating the land. Knowing the terrain in the Old West. Knowing the terrain could be the difference between life and death. Pioneers and settlers had to become expert navigators of the land, mastering natural landmarks, the layout of the land, and the behavior of the weather to find their way and ensure their survival. The vast stretches of wilderness that made up the frontier could be disorienting, especially with the lack of modern tools. Maps were scarce and often inaccurate. Instead, pioneers relied on the landmarks of the landscape, mountain peaks, rivers, and valleys, to guide them. They also paid close attention to the weather, using the patterns of winds, cloud formations, and the behavior of animals to anticipate changes and adjust their path accordingly. Trail markers such as stacked rocks or notches on tree trunks were commonly used to leave clues for others, helping them find their way and avoid getting lost. If caught in a storm, pioneers learned to navigate by the stars, using the North Star and constellations to stay on course during night travel. In the harsh terrain of the West, where resources were scarce and getting lost could mean never being seen again, understanding the landscape wasn't just a skill, it was an essential lifeline. The pioneers of the Old West, who could navigate the land, had a much better chance of survival and success, leaving behind a legacy in Wild West history. Top 5. Self-defense. Protecting what you have in the unpredictable and often hostile environment of the Wild West, self-defense was an essential skill for survival. Whether it was protecting land, livestock, or loved ones, pioneers were constantly at risk of attack from outlaws, hostile Native American tribes, or wild animals. Since law enforcement was sparse, most settlers had to rely on their own means to protect what they had worked so hard to build. One of the most basic and important forms of defense was firearms. Many frontier men and women were proficient with rifles, pistols, and shotguns, knowing that a well-aimed shot could deter a would-be attacker or protect them from predators like wolves or bears. The presence of a gun often determined who had control in a confrontation, and those who were skilled in its use had an advantage in both protecting themselves and their families. However, self-defense didn't always involve guns. Pioneers had to be resourceful and use whatever tools were available. Knives, axes, and even clubs were often used in close-quarter situations. For example, women were known to defend themselves with kitchen tools such as cast-iron skillets when faced with intruders, showing that sometimes simple household items were just as effective as a weapon. Apart from physical defense, knowing how to set up a safe home was crucial. This meant building secure doors, setting up early warning systems like watchdogs, or even just maintaining an awareness of the area around them. In fact, Many pioneers lived by the rule that staying alert and anticipating trouble was just as important as having a weapon ready. In a place where danger was always lurking, self-defense was an indispensable skill that helped ensure survival and allowed families to maintain control over their lives and land. As much as Wild West history is about adventure and discovery, it's also about the fight for security and the protection of what mattered most. The Wild West was a land where survival wasn't guaranteed. It was earned through grit, skill, and determination. The pioneers who faced its harshness, disease, starvation, and danger persevered, and their legacy continues to shape our understanding of this era. Whether hunting, building shelter, or defending themselves, settlers knew survival depended on knowledge, skill, and resolve. As we reflect on Wild West history, it's not just about the legends of outlaws and cowboys, but the everyday people who triumphed over unimaginable hardships. Their resilience is a testament to the human spirit's strength. What survival skill do you think was most crucial in the Wild West? Share your thoughts and stay tuned for more frontier tales.